Welcome back to End is the Future, a podcast that brings together great minds to address the opportunities and challenges of making businesses both sustainable and profitable. I am Ilham Kadri, and I'm delighted to be your host today. If you are as passionate about sustainable business as I am, let's explore how End is the Future together. Hello, everyone. Today, I'm thrilled. I'm happy. I'm excited to be speaking with my good friend, Paul Polman. He has been all along my career a role model, and you will understand why. So Paul is the former CEO of Unilever and one of the foremost leaders in the effort to create sustainable and profitable businesses. He now runs an organization called Imagine, what's a beautiful name, which advocates for businesses becoming a true force for good. Paul is also the author of Net Positive. It's fabulous and explaining how courageous companies thrive by giving more than they take. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ilham, and great to see you again.
You have such an incredible leadership story, and I'm sure many people in the audience know it already. So, born in the Netherlands, not far from here, from Belgium, to a Catholic family, you once thought you would become a priest, but you changed course and went on to have an amazing career, eventually becoming what you call an accidental CEO. Through it, all you've been one of the top voices, inspiring voices for many of the younger generation of CEOs like me in the business world, calling for bold leadership and sustainability. Tell me, Paul, was there a specific moment in your life that truly made you passionate about this new kind of leadership? And do you think that your youthful desire to be a Catholic priest shapes the kind of leader you would later become?
Well, I don't regret not pursuing that direction. But I was born not long ago after World War II, and my parents both were deprived of education. And I always thought it was a long time ago since World War II when I was born. But the older I get, the more I realize how close it was. So, all that counted for them was to give us the education that they were deprived of, to have peace in Europe, to make their communities work. So I think we grew up with some values of dignity and respect for everybody, equity, a certain level of compassion that have served me well throughout my career. But really the issues of the environmental and social side, what you call in the ESG, really came to the foreground more or less in the 90s when we had the first Rio conference in 1992. And then I participated in Rio Plus 20, which was in 2012. And in Rio Plus 20, we actually decided to continue the sequel of the Millennial Development Goals. If you remember, Koviano started in the year 2000, the Millennial Development Goals, half the number of people in poverty in the world, at that time defined as $1.25 a day. We achieved that. Then people said we need to finish the job. And out of that came the Sustainable Development Goals. And I was very lucky, in a sense, to be asked by then Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to be part of the high-level panel representing the private sector to develop these Sustainable Development Goals. So we worked on it for 2 years with business, civil society, governments. I saw the power of these partnerships, and out of that came these Sustainable Development Goals to irreversibly eradicate poverty and do that in a more sustainable and equitable way, or as some people simply call it, to not leave anybody behind. And this is the moment that I really started to implement that in Unilever's business model, because I simply saw it as a great opportunity. It was very clear to me that the planet has planetary boundaries. We can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. We were hitting already at that time some of these planetary boundaries. The issues of climate change were fairly obvious even then, but we haven't really succeeded in translating that into a good business plan. Most people, if I do something good, it must cost me more. Or if I tackle climate change, it must go at the expense of the success or the growth of my company. And bit by bit, I think we've overcome that with technology, with examples, with creativity, with innovation. And now it's probably the growth story of the century that we're sitting on. Most businesses understand the direction we need to take, but we're simply not going at the speed and scale that is needed. So that's what I'm entirely focused on now.
Yeah, and I do remember, Paul, watching you, as an executive and an employee in other lives, right? That you really hold the torch of that sustainability inside Unilever, right? And you were always advocating what I, really pursue today as sustainability is not against profitability. And you recently published an excellent book here, which I have right here with me, called Net Positive. In the book, you and your co-author, Andre Winston, talk about how companies can thrive by giving more than they take. And I found it a really interesting concept because it's very easy to understand. It's put the things on a simple manner, how to give more than what you take from Mother Nature, from our planet. Can you explain more about the book for our listeners? What exactly does it mean to be a net positive company?
It's proving to be very useful, and we're in the third print already, but I really never was intending to write a book. I always felt that the CEOs, when they retire writing books, and they're mainly he still, unfortunately, want to strike their ego or change history. And, that was not appealing to me. But the more I thought about it, I said, well, as I do that, it's probably good to change the mindset or create a movement to reframe what good looks like. And so I asked Andrew Winston, who I admired, and I wanted a US perspective. But the essence is really this, Ilham. If you take the world as 4.6 billion years old and you put it on a scale of 46 years, human beings have only been around for 4 hours. The Industrial Revolution started 1 minute ago. And in that 1 minute, we've cut down half the world's forests. World Overshoot Day, which is the day that we use up more resources than the planet can replenish, this year is July 28th. I would argue that after that day, each day after, we're actually stealing from future generations. We're living well above the planetary boundaries limits. And our linear extractive production model just doesn't work anymore. It's designed for perhaps 3 billion people on this planet, with 8 billion people being 4 times wealthier, if you want to, since World War II than before. It's just putting too much pressure. And that is what we're seeing now in things like climate change, but also in things like equity or a broken food system. There are many more symptoms that are coming to light now. So the book is very simple. Most companies are in the CSR mode. You saw that in Glasgow at the COP26. You saw it at in most of their sustainability reports. It's nothing wrong with that. But in essence, CSR is about less plastics in the ocean, less carbon emission, less deforestation in the supply chain, a little bit better human rights. But it is all about being less bad. But what we're trying to say with this book, less bad is simply not good enough. If I used to murder 10 people and now I only murder 5 people, I'm not a better murderer. So people say, I get it. So I want to be net zero. So all of a sudden we see net zero commitments. It's basically a no harm principle, being sustainable. But sustain means maintain. The change we need is in the mindset is to think regenerative, restorative, reparative. And that is what we call net positive. It's a very simple follow-up question. Is the world better off, yes or no?
So we are so happy, Paul, that you decided to write a book. And one of my favorite chapters in the book is the one on unlocking a company's soul. I think we think a lot with our minds, but bringing the heart and the soul and discovering the company's purpose. I think I've stolen a lot from you as a new CEO. And in the book you write, and I'm reading it, there is nothing more powerful for an organization than getting into the heart of why it exists and then making that purpose come alive. And it's so important that's exactly why we immediately engage in our own purpose exercise when I joined Solvay. Even for a company who is 160 years old, we did that. So can you tell us more about the journey you took in your career to find Unilever's purpose? Did you run into challenges, skepticism? And if so, how did you deal with it? And what companies out there do you think are really living such a purpose, and how you can link it to the net positive?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking this, because that's probably the most important, thing is to have a strong purpose, but not only having that purpose, but the difficult thing is actually making it come alive, which is a question of having the right values and the right behaviors so you get it embedded in your culture. And that's probably the most difficult thing. I personally think that you cannot be a sustainable company if you're not sustainable yourself. And you cannot be a purpose-driven company if you're not purposeful yourself. So it starts with yourself. So you're embedding it as a driver of your business. And this is really what purpose should be doing. When times are so uncertain and volatile environments, when people have so much anxiety about what is going to happen, purpose provides that true north. I liked Bill George's book, which was called True North, which talks about that beacon, that strong inner core. If you have that strong inner core, you actually become more courageous. The road to change is full of skeptics and cynics. But if you have that strong purpose, it keeps you going. And it's tremendously powerful, as I'll tell you in a minute, at Unilever. What we did is probably not different when you did, when you went back to Ernest Solvay, is to really look at the history of the company. When Lord Lever started Unilever at the end of the 19th century, his purpose was to make hygiene commonplace. 1 out of 2 babies in Victorian Britain didn't make it past year 1 either because of the issues of hygiene. So he invented the bar soap. He built the housing for his workers before the factories were up and running, guaranteed 6-day work weeks before anybody else, introduced pensions. In a sense, the man was ahead of his time. In fact, when he even went to the House of Lords, he took the name of his wife. That even hasn't happened since. We're living in 2022. Jim Collins, when he wrote the book From Good to Great, he had something in there that said, nurture the core before you stimulate progress. So out of that came our purpose, which was making sustainable living commonplace. We actually spent a whole year with our top 500 executives discovering their purpose and how to use their purpose to positively influence others and ultimately how to get results. That training has now been extended to nearly all employees in Unilever and still gets the highest scores. And out of that, I think at the end of the day came courage. Courage to take responsibility of our total impact in the world, not only scope 1 and 2. There's still too many companies that think they can outsource their value chain and also outsource their responsibilities. It just doesn't work anymore. And frankly, where you cannot achieve them alone, where you don't have the answers on how to do this, then it requires partnership, and that is courage as well. Because when you work with other people, you're not totally in charge. You might hear the inconvenient truths. You have to understand what real needs are of others to get plans out there that really deal with the interest of all of your stakeholders. So purpose unlocks that. And what we found in Unilever, that when we made this purpose come alive, not only did we see the trust go up in the company, more people willing to work with us in partnerships, which opened opportunities, but more importantly, we saw our employee engagement go through the roof. And we became, in most of the markets we operated in, if not all, the preferred employer. We started to be the 3rd most looked up company on LinkedIn, 2 million people applying every year. So this whole notion of purpose, I think, is incredibly powerful. Companies that are more purpose-driven, that are operating under these longer-term multi-stakeholder formats, put sustainability right at the core of their strategy. So it really pays. And in the case of Unilever, that certainly was the case.
Absolutely. And I think you became an icon for all of us. And Twain used to say, the most important days in our life is the day you are born and the day you know why. And I think you are getting us at the individual level, leadership level, company level to really rethink that purpose. And frankly, again, you've been inspiring me throughout my career. So you talked about courage, having a vision, embarking your employees. And you said also, Paul, that we can't do it alone. And you have a lot of interesting things to say about partnerships in your book and what are the best kind of partnership. Can you explain more? How would you say partnership drive the changes we need to do?
So we have 2 chapters in the book. That's how important we think it is. 1 + 1 is 11, which is basically partnerships in your own value chain or at industry level. And then we have another one that says it takes 3 to tango, which is really partnerships with civil society and governments to drive the broader systems changes. What is currently happening is that most companies, most CEOs try to do the right thing. There are no CEOs who want more unemployment or air pollution or people going to bed hungry. But collectively, we don't seem to achieve these objectives. And it is because we are optimizing within a system that isn't designed to deliver anymore. So without any doubt, You need to work in your partnership to get your suppliers and your customers aligned on your purpose, on your vision. Most companies make carbon commitments on not only scope 1 and 2, but increasingly on scope 3. Well, scope 3 for some is scope 1 or 2 for others. So this broader partnership in the value chain is important. And we see increasingly companies moving in that direction. Very clearly during COVID, companies that had better relationships with their suppliers or their customers were more resilient. They did better during the crisis. When there were supply chain problems, the people worked harder together to solve them. Where the relationships were very transactional and only cost-driven, there was no emotional love, if you want to, or goodwill in the bank account to really go the extra mile. So it really works in that sense. In Unilever, we put programs in place like Partner to Win, or with Solvay was obviously a big partner. We put capabilities in place for our small and medium-sized enterprises. And we had the responsible sourcing code, as we called it, where we helped suppliers get through 3 levels, ultimate level being really deep partnerships aligned on the values. And it served them well. All the suppliers actually were happy to be part of that. But you can only do, as I said, so much. With the global consumer goods industry, which we created as major retailers and manufacturers, we made some commitments on plastics in the oceans, or on deforestation, or on human rights in the value chain. But ultimately, you need the broader partnerships with governments and civil society to truly put the right frameworks or policies in place to ensure that everybody moves, to ensure that there's a level playing field, and to ensure that you go and at scale so that the economics don't start to work against you. So the first 5 years was Unilever, bring our own house in order, gain trust, get a seat at the table. But the second 5 years, I used the size and scale of the organization to drive more transformative partnerships. That's the typical partnership of 1 + 1 is 11. Nobody can do it alone, but together you're actually doing a miracle. I actually created Imagine after I left Unilever very briefly for that same reason, because I understood that all the CEOs are very busy. There's a lot of challenges that you have on your plates, and it's difficult to create these coalitions because sometimes there's competitive pressure, there's lack of resources or knowledge, and it's even more difficult to work with governments. So what we now do is Imagine. We look at the industries that have the most, let's say, devastating effects on the Sustainable Development Goals, which is obviously the energy transition, food, tourist and travel. And how can we get a critical mass of CEOs together across the value chain to work together on things that no company can do alone? So we're moving to get out of single-use plastics, joint buying of green energy, moving to regenerative agriculture. So we find that if the CEOs come together, they become more courageous, but then we can also solve across the value chain some of these bottlenecks. And what BCG, Boston Consulting Group, has actually shown in some of the work that you have seen at the IBC, the International Business Council, at the World Economic Forum, that if you actually are able to transform all of these value chains to sustainable value chains, it's probably 9 to 16% cheaper than if you continue to work on these unsustainable value chains that cause a lot of disruptions and frankly create the issues that come back to us directly or indirectly in our business models.
It's about mindset change. It's about leadership. And I also really loved your chapter on leadership and your discussion of how important empathy and vulnerability and humility are in great leaders, right? While in the old days, IQ, power, experience, and vision were good enough. So can you elaborate on what it takes to be that leader for the future? Are you seeing more and more of these empathetic leaders emerging? Who do you particularly admire as a leader, Paul?
Well, Ilham, you're a great example of that. And I think the company should be proud to have you. And we're certainly proud to have you as part of the B team. And that is proving to be very productive. And we can talk about that later. But there is no doubt that I want to start with that ultimately companies need to make a profit. I always say profit is like white blood cells in your body. You need white blood cells to live, but you don't live for white blood cells alone. So, in fact, nobody lives for white blood cells. It's the same with profit. You need profits to exist, but you don't live for profit. In itself, it doesn't mean anything. So that's where purpose comes in. And leaders understand that. And but I want to start with the performance part. And this is also what gets to your end part. If there is no performance in a company, then openly you won't succeed. We've seen some companies being very progressive on sustainability, trying to be number one on anything to win the prizes. But then if the performance isn't there, you actually do more damage to the changes that we need. So the first thing I always say that you need is definitely the same skills that every leader has had: high level of ethics, hard work, intelligence, know how to run a business by investing with discipline in the things that matter. If you make the wrong acquisitions or you don't invest in innovation, and anything we talk will not matter. I actually have a very broad definition of leadership, which is anybody who touches someone else positively. So we are all leaders, all of us listening. And the first thing we need to do is take care of ourselves. We cannot be sustainable leaders if we're not sustainable ourselves. I am guided a little bit by a very simple pyramid, which starts with physical fitness. It's important that we are physically fit. A bigger lung capacity gets you more oxygen. Your brain uses 25% of your oxygen. It just works better. You're less tired. You're more alert. And that's one of the things I think that increase your chances of success. For that reason, in Unilever, we said if we have 100 people or more in the company, we have a gym. We had these lamplighter programs, as we called it, on changing dietary habits, nutritional habits, etc. Then next to the physical fitness, you get the emotional fitness. If you go to bed and sleep enough, which is very important, you'll be less irritated. I've had many times overnight flights. I slept badly, and then you go right away into meetings. You really have to watch your temper or not give the wrong signals. Emotional fitness is very important. Then you get to the mental fitness, your ability to take time out, to pause, to get new oxygen in, to read books, to meet friends. When some people say I'm working day and night for Unilever or for Solvay, it's not healthy. You do need to do other things to get other ideas in. And then last but not least, the last part of the pyramid is spiritual, or some people might call it purpose. I was always very fortunate to have a strong values-driven and purpose-driven organization. So that's the ultimate part of the pyramid. So take care of that health at all these dimensions, and you'll be a much more resilient leader. You'll also be a better friend or family member. That's important to all of us. So, but on top of that, your chances of success are so much higher if you are a long-term, multi-stakeholder, purpose-driven company. There's no question about it. It just opens so many more doors of possibilities. And the same bifurcation that we've seen in business, where the shorter-term, shareholder-focused business models are not doing so well, and the longer-term, multi-stakeholder business are doing better. During COVID, the leaders that excelled were, in fact, the leaders that showed this high level of humanity, humility, compassion, if you want to, or empathy, that had a strong purpose, understood the power of partnership, were willing to think intergenerational, were systemic thinkers to be able to take that complexity that is out there and distill it to some simple steps and move forward. Why? Because these leaders instilled in a very uncertain time with many pressures on everybody, instilled a level of trust. The reality it is, as we've seen with COVID, the countries that did better during COVID had leaders also that had a higher level of trust. Iceland, Norway, Finland, Denmark, New Zealand. And interestingly, they were all run by women. So not to flatter you, but I think that many of these skills that are needed is more given to the female race than the male race, and we have to work harder to get there. One of the things I did when I came to Unilever, I came in from the outside like you did, which is sometimes an advantage, but also a little bit more of a challenge. I had a very diverse board of 6 white Dutch males and 6 white British males. Could they disagree? But to me, the definition of diversity was quite different. So I insisted when I came that we would get a fully gender diverse board. We had three black Afro-American, two from Africa, one from the US. We had two Chinese. We had wonderful people. And I think it is that board that we put together that helped us, I think, give us confidence in what we were doing or strengthen our responsible business models. And it very much gave me, probably myself also, a different style of leadership than I might have otherwise had.
Absolutely. And I think you said it, frankly, when I looked back at my career, like you, Paul, I'm obviously very proud and, happy to look at many legacies. But at the same time, I'm always dissatisfied and happy with the DE&I I'm leaving behind, because it's complicated, right, to really run in a mandate and drive it. And here at Solvay, and I think this is the first time I'm doing it in my career this way, is we are positioning it not around the stats of the diversity, but rather bringing inclusion and equality in the heart of what we do. That's what we do, and diversity is what you see. So being a net positive company, to come back to the book, is about being environmentally sustainable, of course, but as you say, it's also about addressing equity, and inequality is something very close to my heart and your heart, and I know, or indeed equity, inclusion, and diversity with the same level of urgency. I know your children and grandchildren are very important to you. What kind of word you hope we will leave behind for them, and what type of grandpa are you, Paul?
Well, I don't know. I'm definitely a grandpa that spoils them, and my children now are mad at me because I can hand them over again to them after I spoil them. Yeah. But I'm tremendously proud. I have three boys, and they're happily married, one to someone from Spain, one to someone from Singapore, and one to someone from New Jersey. So my house is the United Nations. I have 6 wonderful grandchildren, 3 boys and 3 girls, and we're obviously mighty proud of them. And I fortunately enough have a farm outside of London. So every weekend, if I can, and I'm here, we get together and we like the outdoors. We ensure that they don't get drugged to their computers or strange things and talk to other people that you don't have the control on. It's fun to have them, and it's also fun to hand them back to their parents when you want some time for yourself.
And this is universal, by the way. So talking about going back to nature and getting back to the human side, I know that your life includes a lot of music, as your wife is an accomplished cello player. I know my son is violinist. Are you a great music lover too? Do you play? Do you listen to music only? Do you do both?
I've never confessed her, but when I was dating her at university, I didn't have any money. And so we were ushering at music hall and, to get free to the concerts. And I just went because I loved her, but I hated classical music. I was one of these really, wild young people in the 60s and 70s. And so I had to pretend that I liked classical music. And the more we've been married for 44 years now, and he has 2 trios and plays in a symphony. And over the years, I've actually come to love classical music. And she plays the cello, which is a beautiful instrument.
It's beautiful.
And, so I'm very blessed. And but she has a broader perspective. I think she brings me to other forms of art. Yesterday, we were in a theater. She brings me to different people already early on in my career that gave me a wider vision and better understanding of diversity. And now we both run some of our foundations, and one of ours is still in the arts. So, because a lot of the liberal arts has been cut out, music has been cut out, and many of these things that we really need to produce the right leaders. If anything in this world, trees and the arts and music plays in a very important role to create, I think, holistic leaders that we need for the future.
Absolutely. And we should be inspired by other, spaces like art and music. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Paul. I think I enjoy it personally because I know a lot about you. I followed you. You were an inspiration. Your leadership is such an inspiration for us all as we strive to achieve the power of that, the N, the A and D, which is our future. And we can do both and make our businesses both sustainable and profitable, bold and empathetic. So thank you for this fascinating discussion.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for joining us today. For more information or to listen to other episodes, visit our website. And if you like these podcasts, don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, be safe.